Okay, folks, so the time is now 12 noon, lunch. Just give a shout out to our lunch partners all throughout South Jersey, all of the South Jersey Primos, depending on where we're at. That's where Signature does lunch. So shout out to Primos. And just to give you guys an update, you can see we had a total of 25 square, and we decided to go with the smaller 15 cubic yard dumpster. We're gonna get every square foot of those torn off shingles and the new waste in that dumpster. And you can see at this point, right, all of that carpentry has been finished. So you can see in the front, the fresh headboard, right, been replaced on the front along that eave wall. And then also we had to replace this board for framing, which runs up the rake wall. So the framing has been fixed. The boards have been swapped out on either side. You can see that we have ice and water from the eaves to 36 inches, from 36 inches up to the ridge. We have our synthetic paper. We will be installing ventilation even on the ridge length for the garage. So the homeowner has some nice toys there, and we want to make sure that they're able to breathe. So the garage is very much in use. And you can see we are well on our way. Okay, we have this flat portion. We talked to the homeowner. I purchased the coating. The problem is the weather was so frigid this week, I didn't even bring it because we're not going to be able to apply it until it's a little warmer. So I will come back to put the sealant that we have for this flat portion. And remember, we used roof tar right at this seam on top of the thin metal that was closing the seam, because we have a very moderate slope here. And you can see we are well on our way on the back side of the main portion of the roof. You can see the chimney's already dressed in ice and water. And the same on the front. You can see the majority of the front side is already covered in shingles. This front corner was the only board that needed to be replaced because it was water damaged. We did replace another board right here, which is where the power fan was. We've removed the power fan because we're installing ridge vent throughout the entirety of ridge lengths. And you can see on this flat portion, we didn't use synthetic paper. So we didn't use ice and water just from the eave to 36 inches. Right? We know that this is a high traffic area. It's dispersing all of the water from the main, and then it's hitting a moderate slope where water would tend to pool. So we want the protection beefed up in those high traffic areas, right? Which would normally just be down by the eaves, except for we have this entire section moderate slope. So we have ice and water covering that entire section, and this section is already covered in shingles. But if you remember, I showed you earlier that it's not ice and water just from that joint line to 36 inches, as you see here, but rather at that joint line all the way up until the slope changes, we have covered with ice and water. So we are well on our way at lunchtime. You know, as you guys can see, there's not really much else to be done once the shingles are done, except to install the ridge vent where the gap has been cut in this ridge. And then the ridge on the garage is closed. So we have to use a circular saw to cut that strip and give it a space for a continuous airflow, or space for air to, a place for air to escape continuously. So we're well on our way. Again, I expect that we should be wrapping up somewhere around the 3 o'clock hour. So we will check back in another hour or two to see progress.